Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Mochi and today I'm going to show you how I draw perspective. Perspective is the illusion of making a 3D object on a 2D plane. Using perspective in your art can give it a little bit more realism. It's also a subject a lot of people have difficulty mastering. Before I get into showing how I draw perspective, I want to say you should start with drawing simple 3D shapes such as cubes or rectangles at different angles. It can get your mind ready to draw more complex 3D objects. Foreshortening will also be a big factor in perspective. It's the technique of compressing an object to create the illusion of depth within a picture. It can make something seem longer, shorter, or closer to the viewer. Foreshortening does look a little funny, but when you put it in its proper context, it can look okay, I guess. I highly recommend watching Cyker's video on foreshortening and the coil method, as it's considered a classic in my opinion. That being said, I'm also using coils, which progressively get bigger or smaller. These act as guidelines for where my 3D object is going to stretch or compress. I'm first going to start with a thumbnail. It was an easy process. Using the coil method, I mapped out the arm, hand, and how big I wanted it to look. Obviously, we know I'm using some perspective because my hand isn't that big compared to my head. Fingers, nails, and the pencil are all at an angle, which makes it seem like the hand is extremely close to the camera, while the rest of the body is further back. Soon after sketching the coils, I simply began to draw over a hand and the rest of the body. It is pretty difficult to find the exact reference you want online nowadays, so I did take a picture of myself in order to get an exact reference of what I wanted. Just remember, at some point you will have to draw 3D objects within a 2D plane. This does include cylinders, cubes, rectangles, whatever works best for you. After some rendering, this is the final product. Moving on, the next example is something that is fairly common, a fishbowl perspective, where everything seems to be enlarged and widened. Fishbowl perspectives are also rounded, so there's no singular straight lines in a fishbowl artwork. For my next piece, I use a reference I found online to recreate the effect. And if I'm being totally honest here, Procreate's liquefy and distort tools did most of the work for me. I mean, yes, I drew the starting perspective of the fingers, but to enlarge and make the fingers look compressed, I used the liquefy tool to do so. I also remembered that fingers are cylindric-like objects. They should look shortened because we're looking at the finger from above. I added in a background, remembering that the hallways should be rounded, added some posters, lazily rendered, added some gradients, and finished the artwork. Pretty cool. Another common type of perspective is known as the overhead or top-down perspective. This type is easy to replicate. I'll be using one of my OCs as an example. He's a humanoid, so it shouldn't be too much trouble drawing him. The human body can be simplified into a rectangular or cylindrical shape. As I said before, the bottom of a cylinder should get smaller and tinier as it's farther away from the camera. Same here with my OC. We all know he's not built like this. Or is he? He has normal proportions, and when looking at the image, your brain tells you that we're looking at him from above. Of course, his feet is going to look smaller. I was also pretty lazy with the sketch. This is something that I did under an hour and was honestly good practice. Moving on, there's one more type of perspective that I don't see as often. Paintings of big buildings and complicated works, all at a very pleasing angle. This does have to do with composition, however, I'm not focusing on that. Primarily, I started gathering references. My perspective skills were a bit rusty, but I still managed to create something that looked good. For this piece, I used a different brush simply called Painting, which will be linked below. It's a brush I like to use for concept or lazy art. Applying everything I've said previously, I started with a nice gargoyle. Just to let you know, 90% of the budget went into that thing. Personally, I wanted to draw something similar to a museum. It had pretty big pillars and a lot of display cases. Because the artwork's perspective is set in a high corner, you can see mostly everything in one room. This is somewhat related to an overhead perspective. For structures like the pillars, I made sure that they were getting smaller at the bottom, signifying that we're higher in position, and the bottom is away from the camera. Other things such as display cases, posters, benches, and other pillars will also be smaller as they're farther away. Not to mention every line is heading towards one direction. Again, this is due to the camera's position. We're looking at an angle where rooms being rotated kind of makes sense. In the end, I think the result looked great. I relied on references, my brain, and techniques such as the coil method. If you ever want to start practicing things in a different perspective, do what I did. Practice makes you perfect. I've gathered some more resources linked below where you can check out other amazing artists' tips and tricks. And thank you for watching. I also thank my subscribers for waiting so long. Also, shout out to that one fan that I played with a while back. I actually never thought I'd get recognized in public. As a content creator, I hope to have a small community, which you can help me in by joining my art server link below. You can join to participate in future videos or for personalized art help. If my Discord server gets big enough, I hope to host special events. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.
I've ever actively wanted to hurt you. Like, it's not even hurt because I've not been there for you when you needed me. The conversation trails off. You're both unwilling to look at each other. The pain searching for your brain terminates with a sudden pull of the plug.